There is a certain power in silence, a power we often underestimate. When the constant hum of conversations fades away, something remarkable happens. A man, in his quiet moment, is given the opportunity to meet himself where he truly is. Emotional vulnerability is a quiet and often overlooked force. It's the very thing that allows us to truly connect with ourselves and others, yet we fear it because it asks us to show up in our most raw, unguarded state. For a man, emotional vulnerability can feel like an impossible mountain to climb. For so long, he has been conditioned to hold his emotions back, to bury them under layers of strength, logic, and composure. The idea of revealing feelings, fear, sadness, loneliness can feel like a sign of weakness. And yet, without vulnerability, we lose the chance to experience genuine emotional intimacy and understanding. When the noise stops and the constant chatter of words fades, emotional vulnerability becomes a space for clarity. A man left with his thoughts and emotions begins to face the feelings that have always been there, hidden just beneath the surface. For the first time, he might allow himself to feel that sadness he's ignored or the fear he's carried for so long. It's as though the silence creates a safe container for him to explore these emotions without the fear of judgment or dismissal. This is the moment when walls begin to crumble. The barriers he's built to protect himself start to soften, and he experiences what it means to truly be seen, not for his actions or his roles, but for who he truly is. He allows himself to be imperfect, to admit that he doesn't always have it together, to show up without the armor that he's worn for so long. And in that vulnerability, something powerful shifts. What many fail to realize is that vulnerability doesn't make us weaker, it makes us human. It's through our willingness to face the parts of ourselves that we've hidden away that we grow. When a man finally lets go of the need to be invulnerable, he can allow himself to feel his anger without letting it control him, to grieve without suppressing his tears, and to experience joy without second-guessing his worthiness. Emotional vulnerability is not just about feeling, it's about the courage to lean into those feelings, to sit with them, and to learn from them. It's in those quiet moments of vulnerability that true growth occurs. A man who has spent years avoiding his emotions can, in the stillness, begin to rebuild his emotional foundation. He might discover that his fears, once overwhelming, are more manageable than he ever believed. He might find that expressing emotions doesn't diminish his strength, it enhances it, making him more connected to others and to himself. And in the end, vulnerability becomes the bridge that leads him to a deeper understanding of what it means to live fully, authentically, and with compassion for himself and for the people around him. Self-reflection is one of the most profound acts of personal growth. Yet it's something that many of us avoid because it requires us to confront the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. It's easy to stay caught up in the busyness of life, to push forward without taking the time to pause, to question, or to understand. We can go through the motions, checking off tasks, meeting expectations, and fulfilling roles, all while avoiding the deeper question of who we are and why we do the things we do. But self-reflection is not a luxury, it's a necessity for anyone who seeks to live with purpose and authenticity. For a man particularly, self-reflection often feels like a challenge. For years, he might have defined himself by external measures, his career, his achievements, his responsibilities. These things shape his identity, and for a long time, they provide a sense of meaning. But when the words stop and the distractions fade, there is no longer a place to hide. The reflection that takes place in those moments is not about his performance, it's about his being. He begins to ask questions that don't have easy answers. What is it that truly matters to me? What have I avoided about myself because I was too afraid to confront it? Who am I when I'm not living up to the expectations of others? Self-reflection is often uncomfortable because it requires us to move beyond surface-level thoughts and into the deeper waters of our beliefs, our values, and the stories we've told ourselves about who we are. When a man stops talking and listens to his inner voice, he starts to recognize the patterns in his life, the ways in which he's repeatedly chosen to protect himself rather than face what's real. He might see that he's been driven by fear, by the need to prove himself, or by an internal narrative of inadequacy that he never had the courage to examine before. In these quiet moments, the man comes to understand that self-reflection isn't just about identifying the things he's done wrong. It's about recognizing the parts of himself that need healing, the beliefs he holds that no longer serve him, and the potential he has yet to fully tap into. He starts to differentiate between the things he's done because they were expected of him and the things he wants to do because they are aligned with his true self. He confronts the story he's been living and he begins to rewrite it, not from a place of perfection, but from a place of truth. It's easy to define yourself by what you've achieved or the roles you play, but self-reflection invites a deeper exploration of what truly defines you as a person. When a man takes time to reflect, he begins to see that he's not just a father, a partner, or a provider. He's a complex, multidimensional being with desires, dreams, vulnerabilities, and a deep well of untapped potential. He recognizes that he doesn't need to have all the answers, but he does need to be honest about the questions he's been avoiding. This process is not instantaneous, nor is it always comfortable. There will be moments of discomfort, of confrontation with parts of himself he would rather leave untouched. But it's in these moments that the seeds of growth are planted. With each reflection, a man learns something new about himself. He starts to understand his motivations, his values, and his capacity for change. Self-reflection teaches him that growth doesn't come from striving for perfection, but from the willingness to be honest, to acknowledge where he's been, and to take intentional steps toward who he truly wants to become. Self-reflection becomes a form of self-compassion. It's an invitation to meet yourself where you are, not where you think you should be. It's about acknowledging your flaws and your strengths, your mistakes and your triumphs, and realizing that you are enough in your imperfect, evolving state. For a man who has avoided self-reflection for so long, this is a transformative moment. It's an opportunity to connect with his true self and create a life that is authentically his, not defined by expectations or external pressures, but by the quiet, honest truth of who he truly is. Responsibility is one of the most profound acts of maturity and personal integrity. It is the willingness to own our actions, decisions, and the impact we have on others, both directly and indirectly. Yet true responsibility goes beyond the surface of meeting obligations or fulfilling duties. It's about acknowledging the consequences of our choices, both the positive and the negative, and understanding the role we play in shaping the lives of those around us. For a man, responsibility can sometimes feel like a heavy burden. Society often tells him that his worth is tied to what he provides, to how he performs, and to the roles he plays in his family, his career, and his community. These external pressures can create a sense of distance between him and the deeper truth of what it means to be truly responsible, not just for others, but for himself. But when the noise of constant expectation fades and he's given the space to pause and reflect, responsibility takes on a new meaning. In those moments of quiet, when a man stops talking and begins to look inward, responsibility becomes less about fulfilling an external duty and more about confronting the ways in which he's impacted the world around him. He sees that responsibility isn't just about the tasks he completes or the promises he keeps, but about the choices he makes, both in the big and small moments, and the way those choices ripple out into the lives of others. He recognizes that, just as he has the power to lift others up, he also has the power to hurt them, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Responsibility means owning both sides of that equation. There's a raw honesty that comes with this kind of self-awareness, the understanding that we cannot control everything, but we can always control how we respond to situations, how we show up in relationships, and how we choose to navigate the complexities of life. For a man, accepting responsibility means confronting the difficult truths of where he may have fallen short, where he may have let others down, or where he may have failed to live up to his own standards. It's not about seeking to blame or to make excuses. It's about recognizing where growth is needed and taking ownership of that space. Responsibility also involves a shift from a mindset of blame to a mindset of ownership. It's easy to deflect, to point fingers, and to externalize our problems. But in the silence, a man can begin to see the patterns of his life, how certain decisions were made from a place of fear, avoidance, or a desire for control. He may realize that the pain he's caused in others wasn't always intentional, but came from a place of unresolved issues or unmet needs. In these quiet moments of reflection, he accepts that while he cannot undo the past, he has the power to make different choices moving forward. Owning responsibility is also about giving himself the grace to learn from his mistakes. It's about recognizing that being responsible doesn't mean being perfect. It means being honest, being present, and taking the necessary steps to heal, repair, and grow. For a man who has perhaps spent his life running from responsibility, avoiding the discomfort of facing mistakes, or neglecting the emotional labor required to build strong relationships, this realization can be transformative. Responsibility becomes not a weight to carry, but a freedom to choose with awareness, to act with integrity, and to grow into a more intentional version of himself. There's also a deeply human element to responsibility. It's about recognizing that we are all interconnected, that our actions have consequences, and that we have a role in shaping the world around us. For a man, responsibility means understanding that he is not an isolated entity, but part of a larger community, whether it's his family, his colleagues, or his society. The way he shows up in the world matters not just to himself, but to those he loves and to the broader fabric of his community. Responsibility asks him to consider the legacy he's leaving, not in terms of material success or external achievement, but in terms of the relationships he nurtures, the values he upholds, and the kindness he extends. At its core, responsibility is an invitation to step into our fullest potential, to recognize that we are capable of more than we may have ever believed. When a man takes ownership of his actions, he moves from a place of fear to one of courage, from a place of passivity to one of intentionality. He starts to see that responsibility is not a burden to bear, but a powerful tool for creating meaningful change in his own life and in the lives of those around him. It's through this understanding that he becomes not only accountable to others, but accountable to the person he wants to become. And in that responsibility, he finds both strength and healing, moving toward a future where he can act with purpose, integrity, and love. Connection is one of the most profound human experiences we can have, yet it's often misunderstood as something that is simply built through words and interactions. At its core, true connection is about the deep, unspoken understanding between individuals, a shared recognition that transcends external validation or surface-level exchanges. It's a bond that is felt, not just expressed, and it goes beyond the casual conversations or the shared moments of laughter. It's found in the pauses, in the silence, in the spaces where two people meet without the need to fill the gaps with words. For a man, connection can sometimes feel elusive, especially in a world that often values achievement, independence, and strength over emotional openness. Society teaches him that connection is something that must be pursued, a goal to be met through actions or accomplishments rather than something that is nurtured from within. But when the noise and expectations subside and he stops talking and starts listening not just to others but to himself, the true nature of connection begins to reveal itself. In those quiet moments, when he is no longer preoccupied with the need to be seen or understood by others, a man begins to realize that true connection is not about impressing or performing. It's about being present, about allowing others to see him as he is without pretense or defense. He understands that connection is rooted in vulnerability, in the willingness to expose the parts of himself that he has kept hidden. These are the parts that crave understanding, compassion, and empathy. When he stops talking, he opens the door to listening, really listening, not just to the words spoken by others, but to their emotions, their unvoiced needs, and the energy that flows between people. This listening is a form of deep connection. It's a space where the barriers between two people begin to dissolve, where the need for validation is no longer a driving force. Instead, there is a shared experience, a mutual recognition that we are all human, imperfect, and striving for understanding. For a man, this kind of listening is often transformative. It allows him to connect with others not from a place of performance, but from a place of acceptance. He no longer feels the need to constantly assert himself or prove his worth because he understands that real connection comes from showing up without the need to impress or control. The absence of words also gives him the opportunity to recognize the nuances of connection that go unnoticed in the rush of everyday life. It's in the small, quiet moments, the touch of a hand, the shared glance, the unspoken understanding that deep bonds are formed. These are the moments when a man feels seen, when he realizes that connection doesn't always have to be verbal. It can exist in the spaces between the words, in the vulnerability shared without expectation, and in the silent understanding that passes between two people. Connection also means accepting that it's not always easy or instant. True connection often requires patience, time, and the willingness to be present, even when it's uncomfortable. For a man who has spent much of his life in self-reliance or emotional isolation, learning to connect in this way can feel like an entirely new language. But the more he allows himself to stop talking and begin listening both to himself and to others, the more he discovers that connection is not a transaction, but a continuous flow of energy, trust, and shared experience. Through connection, a man learns that he is not alone. Even in his most difficult moments, when he feels isolated or misunderstood, he begins to recognize that there are others who share his struggles, his joys, and his experiences. In connecting with others in an authentic way, he also begins to connect more deeply with himself. He learns that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a bridge that brings him closer to the people around him. And as he nurtures these connections, he finds that they are not one-time exchanges, but ongoing, dynamic relationships that evolve and deepen over time. In the silence, connection grows. It's not just about the things we say to each other, but about the ways we allow each other to exist fully in our presence. A man learns that true connection is not something to be forced, but something that unfolds naturally when both people are willing to show up as they truly are. It's in this quiet space of acceptance, understanding, and shared humanity that connections deepen in ways words alone can never achieve. Healing is a deeply personal journey that often begins in the quiet spaces of our lives, when the constant noise of the world fades away and we're left alone with our thoughts, our feelings, and our pain. It's in these moments of stillness that healing starts to take root, though it's rarely an immediate process. Healing requires time, patience, and a willingness to confront the wounds we've carried for far too long, whether they are physical, emotional, or psychological. For a man, the path to healing can feel like an overwhelming challenge, especially if he has been taught to suppress his pain, to ignore his vulnerabilities, and to carry on without addressing the parts of himself that need attention. When a man stops talking, when he quiets the constant internal dialogue that so often surrounds him, he creates the space necessary for healing to begin. It's not about denying the pain or pretending it doesn't exist. It's about facing it head on and allowing himself to feel the full weight of his experiences. Often the healing journey requires acknowledging wounds that have been buried for years, whether they stem from childhood trauma, the loss of a loved one, or the scars left by unmet needs in relationships. These wounds can become part of the fabric of who we are if we don't actively work to heal them, and for a man, they can manifest as emotional distance, anger, shame, or disconnection from others. In the absence of words, he might finally be able to sit with these emotions without the urge to dismiss them, to explain them away, or to bury them under the weight of busyness. It's in this quiet space that he starts to process what he's been carrying without judgment, without the need for immediate solutions. Healing, at its core, is a process of integration, of taking the fractured parts of ourselves and allowing them to come back together, not in an effort to achieve perfection, but in order to create a more whole, more authentic version of ourselves. The healing process is often slow and nonlinear. It's not always about fixing what's broken, but about learning to live with the pain, to understand its origins, and to honor the impact it has had on our lives. A man, in these quiet moments, may come to understand that healing isn't about eliminating pain, but about learning to navigate it with grace, resilience, and compassion. It's about recognizing that pain is a natural part of life, but it doesn't have to define who we are. Through the stillness, he begins to listen to his body, to the ways in which it has stored pain over time. The tension in his muscles, the tightness in his chest, the restless nights, all of these physical symptoms are messages from his body telling him that there is something that needs to be addressed. As he stops talking, he begins to tune into these signals, offering his body the attention it needs to release the emotional burdens it has carried for so long. This physical awareness becomes an integral part of the healing process as the mind and body work together to create a sense of balance and well-being. Healing is not a solitary act, though. It requires connection not just with others, but with oneself. For a man who has often been taught to suppress his feelings, healing might involve learning to be kinder to himself, to treat himself with the same compassion he would offer to a friend. It's about accepting that he is worthy of love, of care, and of understanding, even in his most imperfect state. This self-compassion is a cornerstone of the healing process, as it allows him to break free from the cycle of self-criticism, shame, and emotional isolation that has kept him from fully healing. In this space of stillness, a man might also begin to uncover the stories he has been telling himself about his pain. Perhaps he has believed that he must be strong at all costs, that vulnerability is a weakness, or that showing emotion is a sign of failure. These stories, while they may have served a protective purpose in the past, no longer serve him. As he works through the healing process, he starts to rewrite these narratives, replacing them with stories that honor his humanity, his complexity, and his capacity to grow. The act of healing also invites forgiveness both of others and of oneself. For a man who has carried resentment, guilt, or anger, forgiveness becomes an essential part of the process. It's not about condoning the actions of others or erasing the pain, but about freeing himself from the grip of past hurts. Forgiveness in this context is an act of liberation, of reclaiming personal power, and of choosing to move forward without the weight of past grievances holding him back. As healing progresses, a man may find that he begins to approach life differently. He is no longer driven by the need to prove himself, to numb his pain, or to run from the things that scare him. Instead, he becomes more attuned to the present moment, more able to fully experience the richness of life without the filters of past wounds distorting his perception. This shift is subtle but profound. It's a movement from surviving to thriving, from living in reaction to living with intention. Through the quiet, through the pain, and through the work of self-reflection and growth, healing takes place. It's not always a linear process, and there will be setbacks along the way. But with each step, a man becomes more aligned with his true self, more connected to his emotions, and more at peace with the journey he has undertaken. The wounds that once seemed insurmountable begin to heal, not by erasing their existence, but by integrating them into the fabric of who he is. Healing becomes a part of his story, not something he must overcome, but something that shapes him into the person he is becoming. In the end, when we stop talking, we open the door to the most profound and transformative parts of ourselves. It is in silence, in stillness, that we are able to hear what we have been too afraid to acknowledge, the vulnerability we hide, the responsibilities we have avoided, the connections we have longed for, and the healing we have delayed. These are not just fleeting moments, they are opportunities for deep self-discovery, growth, and renewal. For a man, the journey of self-reflection, responsibility, vulnerability, connection, and healing is not easy, but it is undeniably essential. Each step forward is an act of courage, an invitation to live more fully, more authentically, and more intentionally. When we allow ourselves to pause, to stop the constant chatter, we discover that the answers we seek are not outside of us, they are within, waiting to be unearthed with compassion, patience, and openness. It is only in embracing these quiet moments of introspection and honesty that we can truly begin to understand ourselves, our roles in the world, and the relationships that shape our lives. Through this process, we come to see that the most powerful changes are not those made by external forces, but those made within us. And it is in this inner transformation that we unlock the potential to create a life of meaning, purpose, and deep connection with others.